Hey
Hey
everyone.
everyone, welcome to today's webinar on AI workflows that every CPG founder needs to know. We're going to be going through a lot of really awesome things. I know AI is one of those areas that every brand is starting to explore, but a lot of founders are trying to figure out how it actually can impact their business in a useful and valuable way. So I invited on Marcos from Kaizentree to really talk through some of the cutting edge things that brands are doing. So I will pass it on to you, Marcos, to open it up.
Hey everyone. It's great to be here today. So as just Jordan mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about AI agents in CPG operations. And so just as a quick starter, I'd love to know, who here is already using AI in their day-to-day. If you could just sort of, yeah, we've got a poll that just came
Yeah,
up. You could fill that in. And also, like, what are you using?
awesome. We'll give it another minute here. All right, cool.
All right, so I can see that clearly ChatGPT is the majority. Yeah, that interesting that a few of you are using Claude as well. And then here I see an AI-enabled software. So it seems like everyone here is familiar, except for maybe one person, with AI and is already using it. Um, and so actually, what a lot of these, I'll be going into depth about, what are AI agents, how do they compare to a lot of the platforms here, which are really more like AI chatbots or just LLMs. And so without further ado, I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. All right, let's see. Cool.
All right, looks good. We can see it.
Yeah. So yeah, just as a brief overview, so I'm the co-founder of Kaizentree, and so we help brands automate their inventory and operations management. And so I'll be going through a few different ways in which we've been helping implement AI agents across various CPG brands, hopefully some that you might recognize in the logos below. And so the first question that we often see are, like what are AI agents? And so the way that I like to think about AI agents is kind of like as if you have a quarter time assistant who is extremely good at doing one workflow. So if you kind of divide your day-to-day into specific tasks, um, each task could be taken over by an AI agent. Um, and so the main thing here is that, these are autonomous systems. They're adaptive. They can plug into, your Google Sheets, your Shopify, your system of record, and Gmail, for example, and essentially connect the dots between your platforms and complete whatever actions you set them up to do. So to some extent, it's kind of like having a digital employee that's able to do like one specific task. It could be a complex task, but it's really just one thing from end to end. And so, as I mentioned, AI agents are quite different to, what to what ChatGPT does. And so the main difference is here is that ChatGPT is an online interface. It's a chat experience. So you can ask it questions. It's very good for helping you write emails, for helping you understand data, or sometimes you can extract data, but then you have to copy paste it across. And it's very good for helping you fill any knowledge gaps that you may have. So very good for, receiving and analyzing information. Now, where AI agents come in are more in actually taking action. And so, as I mentioned before, you can have AI agents that connect your different systems and that, for example, automate a lot of the data entry that goes into using Google Sheets. Um, and they're able to handle, multi-step workflows across different platforms. Whereas ChatGPT, you can upload documents. There's some integrations to like Microsoft Drive platforms, but there's really no way for you to be plugging that in within ChatGPT into your different platforms that you're using. And so that's really a big difference in AI agents. GPT gives you knowledge, and AI agents can really take action on your behalf.
Marcos, one thing I'm curious
Yeah.
about when you talk about it here is like I've used a platform like Zapier
hmm
to create, workflows, and
hmm
it's a little bit more direct. Like I have to tell it what to do.
Yeah.
Curious on like the difference between like that and AI agents and how it's a little different.
Yeah, great question. So Zapier Um, is definitely something you can use to connect different platforms, but it's a lot more rigid. And there's really no kind of, let's call it thinking behind it. So as soon as there's any kind of business logic that needs to be applied, um, it really sort of breaks down. Um, and there's several limitations with Zapier around that make it difficult to use for pulling data from emails and then syncing that up to different platforms. So there is definitely a lot of things that can be done with Zapier, but anything that requires business logic is where that starts to fall apart.
Okay, makes sense.
And I'll go into some case studies, which show very clearly, how AI agents have been successfully deployed. And so another question that I often come across is, when to be using AI agents, when to be using virtual assistants, and when to be, what tasks to be, giving or doing yourself or giving to your other team members. Um, and so the breakdown that I've seen work successfully, and I see be the most common, is where a lot of the early stage companies will be using virtual assistants at the beginning. So this is when there's really no structured process. They're still figuring out, where they're selling, what their, systems are going to be, what their processes are going to be. And so there's a lot of ad hoc data entry that has to happen. And so that's where having a virtual assistant that can just, jump in at a moment's notice to do a one-off or a less frequent manual grunt work type task is very useful. Um, but as soon as that whatever they're doing becomes more repetitive and now it's a consistent thing. For example, we see a lot of brands, in the early days when they're doing wholesale, they'll be getting emailed purchase orders. And so at the beginning, you can have a virtual assistant do that. But as you scale, your volume gets bigger. Um, it doesn't make sense to have a virtual assistant do that anymore. And that's when you can shift it over to an AI agent. So a lot of the workflows that we see AI agents take over are things that, in some cases, are initially tackled by a virtual assistant. Simply because AI agents are infinitely scalable. They also have better, higher data security. Having someone overseas looking at your very sensitive customer data. We see a lot of, especially the larger brands, steer very clear of that. Um, and so that's kind of the big difference we see there. And then with, anyone on your team or even yourself, you really don't want to be spending any time moving data across different places. And so, what we're seeing is as the future is going to be one where these CPG brands are, everyone internally is focused on more strategic actions and all of the grunt work of moving data across systems, filling out your, ERP or inventory software is getting completely delegated away. Um, and so what we're seeing is that a lot of these brands are going to be extremely streamlined. And AI agents are getting easier and easier to adopt. So it's not even just if you're, a $10 million plus brand. We've implemented into some much smaller brands where it's cheaper to be using an AI agent than to be hiring a full-time employee for certain tasks. And I'm happy to go into any questions if anyone has any examples of workflows that they have in mind. We can feel free to ask, or we can come to those at the end as well.
Yeah, one thing I want to invite everyone, if you have questions rather than like a term or something that's relevant to your business or where you should do something, feel free to ask that in the chat and we can ask that. I'll ask that to Marcos as it's relevant. But if you have longer, more in-depth questions, we can definitely go through those at the end.
Yeah. And so there's also different types of AI agents. I think maybe a lot of you might have seen, customer support AI agents or, a lot of AI sales reps that essentially will do your email marketing and your outbound messaging for you. Um, and so you really is sort of five different categories. The ones that I'm going to focus on today and that we're implementing at Kaizentree are everything around workflow automation. So everything around operational workflow automation. But there's also different AI agents that you can use for customer support, for in-depth research and analysis, and for decision support. Although a lot of those other categories can also be handled by those platforms that you checked in at the beginning. Like a ChatGPT can do a lot of research and analysis too. But the workflow automation is where AI agents are very different because they can connect your platforms. And some of the common pitfalls that we do see with brands that are implementing AI agents is that they are trying to automate something that is very poorly defined. So the inputs are unclear and the outputs are unclear, and so that's bound to fail. We also see brands often try to take on too much. So they'll try to automate, an entire role, let's say with AI. But really the best way to do it is to take one very simple workflow. Again, for example, you know, pulling data received via email, for example, distributor reports, and then ingesting that and populating it into your system of record. And then from there, you can layer on more complexity, which I'll go into in a moment. And you can also add more workflows. But definitely starting with a very simple one is the best way to do it. And then also, AI can hallucinate. And so one thing that we do when we're implementing AI agents is we do have a human in the loop. And so what that means is that we're catching any time that there's a potential hallucination that the AI maybe pulls data incorrectly, we're catching that so that it doesn't affect the quality of your data and it doesn't get written into your system. But we do see brands that don't have this kind of like a safety net in there. And so it's super risky because you can't just trust it blindly. Someone does need to be kind of on top of it to some extent. And so with the brands that we implement into, we do that ourselves. So that, on your side, you don't even have to worry about it. You can trust that it is accurate. But that is because we have a human in the loop.
Marcos, I'm curious and like if you found when you found hallucinations, what's usually the cause of it, and then how are you changing those workflows to limit that from
Yeah.
happening again?
So actually what happens whenever there's something that looks potentially inaccurate, it gets flagged immediately. So whoever is, on the brand side, let's say our point of contact gets flagged an email saying, "Hey, this purchase order had this information that didn't look fully accurate. Can you just confirm, or like, they basically just confirm it." And so we do train it over time. Like what we see in the first 2 weeks of any implementation is that there are, errors that come up that we need to then calibrate for and take into account. And then after 2 weeks, typically there's very little, maybe one, thing that gets flagged a month or every 2 weeks. Yeah, but the first 2 weeks of any of implementation, there are a back and forth of calibrating the models or the workflow, I should say.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess
And so
as we're
now,
thinking about
yeah.
that, you were kind of mentioning PO automation. Mike just
Mhm.
had a comment and question where he was interested
Mhm.
in like using AI agent to re-email POs, sync with NetSuite and an Excel order tracker once a live employee has validated the PO accuracy
Yeah.
and accepted the PO. Is that something that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
along those lines you help set up?
Yeah, Mike, so you're actually asking about a case study that I'm about to go into. So we do that exact same thing with a brand called First Leaf, which is a subscription wine company, and it's exactly that we're doing. Yeah, and so I'll go into it in more detail in a moment. But yeah, that's something that AI agents can do, and that we have implemented already into some other brands.
Awesome.
Um, and yeah, so the rule of thumb of really about thinking what to automate is it a workflow that is being repeated? Is it rules based? And is it something that's actually slowing your team down? Obviously, you don't want to automate something that's taking like less than 5 hours a month. I mean, maybe you do, but the value there is lower. Although it could be, worth starting with a workflow that's, 5 hours a month and then adding more complexity to that automation so that eventually it'll be saving you 20 to 30. Because as I said, it's best to start with the simplest kind of workflow. But it has to be something that's repeatable and that's rules based. Anything where you're kind of thinking on the fly or that is, a lot of judgment driven is best handled by a person. And if it's a workflow that's not being repeated, sort of like a one-time thing, that's best to either use a virtual assistant or just, do it yourself or someone on the team. Yeah. And if anyone has any other examples of workflows that they have in mind, feel free to add that into the chat and I can comment on those directly. Okay, so now onto the case studies. So so Actual Veggies is quite a large brand. They sell across all over the US. And so prior to working with us, they were having, all of their purchase orders come in through SPS Commerce, and then someone on their team was manually, checking them, opening them, checking them, looking for if, the minimum order quantities are being respected, and for some other criteria. and then they would basically copy that across into their Google Sheet and then flag it with the customer whenever a minimum order quantity was not being respected, or when the delivery address was something that they could not ship to. Um, and so this was something that was taking them 20 hours a month. And they were, fast growing brands. So, but the amount of time that is being saved with this single workflow is increasing every month. And so now what they've been able to automate with our AI agents is like we have the agent pull the purchase orders from SPS Commerce, and then it's processing that data, it spits it out into Google Sheets, and whenever there's, any of the criteria that needs to be flagged is sort of checked, we email our point of contact there. Um, and so what this means is that there's no context switching for their team. They don't have to worry about this anymore at all. And they know that whenever there's any issues around the minimum order quantities not being met, they get flagged. Whereas before, what happens is that these things get batch updated, right? Because people sometimes procrastinate or they get busy with other things. And so these POs stay on SPS Commerce for some time and they only get checked, you know, once a week or something like this. And so the reporting is also not accurate. And so this is something that, what has been automated entirely. Um, and so, yeah, so our point of contact at Actual Veggies is Alex. And you can see here kind of his experience with that specific workflow, um, where this is just one of the workflows that they're automating. It's where they started. But actually just last week, they've been adding more workflows now that they've proven this one out. So now we're, for example, we're checking that their purchase orders match the bill of ladings that are being sent, so that if there's any discrepancies, they get flagged. And there's a bunch of other processes there related to purchase orders that are now also being automated with AI agents. So really, they started with this, simple workflow, which was first actually just sending the purchase orders into Google Sheets and then flagging the minimum order quantities when they're not being met, and now checking that the POs match the bill of lading, and then there's more and more that will be added over time. Um, and and for context, this is something that took less than a week to set up. Usually the turnaround time that we have for implementing AI agents is within a week. And I'll go into that process in a moment as well. All right, so this is the NetSuite workflow, Mike, that I was referring to. Um, and so in their case, what we're doing is so that their operations team actually still functions out of Google Sheets, even though the company uses NetSuite. So all their forecasting and a lot of their day-to-day tracking is done on Google Sheets. And so originally their team was having to basically keep the two systems in sync manually. So whenever they would, mark a purchase order as having been, received, fulfilled, or shipped, they would have to manually adjust that and create the record on NetSuite, which was taking them a significant amount of time each month. And so now that's been fully automated. So whenever they check a box on Google Sheet, it triggers the AI agent, which goes into NetSuite and takes the corresponding action. And this was a workflow that and they initially had some of the employees doing, but they hated it so much that they actually went into other areas of the company. And so it kept coming back to the director of operations, which is a complete waste of his time, of anyone who's really running or, high up in a brand, to be doing manual data entry. I mean, it's quite ridiculous. And so he's been able to completely get that off his plate, with these AI agents that we've implemented. Um, but so to speak, Mike, to you directly, we are able to read purchase orders from email. Um, and then that can be written directly into NetSuite and into Google Sheets. So for example, in this case, the data is being moved from Google Sheets to NetSuite. In, in Actual Veggies case, it's being actually written into Google Sheets. But these can be configured in the way that, you're asking about here. Yeah. And the trigger can be exactly that, when an Excel order is marked as validated, that can be triggered and sent into NetSuite, which is exactly what we're doing with First Leaf.
That's awesome. Mike, since your question is really relevant, did you have anything else to add or any questions if you want to hop on the mic right now?
Yeah, sure. I'm since you mentioned hallucination, I'm curious how your tool and the AI agent generally gives a live employee like a really easy, efficient way to double check and like, validate accuracy. I'm
Mhm.
imagining like a single click triggers a bunch of different actions, but that there's still, I'm sort of envisioning some screen with two windows, one with email and one with what the AI is going to enter into, NetSuite or wherever, so that like a very quick visual back and forth
Mhm.
will say, oh yeah, this everything looks clean and perfect and accurate here, like one click
Mhm.
go.
So basically the way that I know First Leaf does it is that they audit the data entry on NetSuite as if it were a regular employee doing it too. So the process that they were using to audit their team is also functioning for the AI agents that we've implemented for them. And so that's how they're checking all the actions that are being taken. In the case of actual veggies, they're getting email notifications. This is something that we can actually configure based on what you prefer, whether you want to be getting those reports whenever something is being triggered and sent across, um, or in whatever way works for you. So we've seen like each brand has a different preference about how the data is being validated, and we can work with you to meet that. Yeah, it's customizable.
Awesome.
But in terms, I'll add one more point here, but one thing that's different in the way that we implement is that we don't actually have a customer-facing interface. So all of this is happening in the background for you. And so we call it sort of like a quiet automation. Um, and so the main points of interaction with our customers are via their Slack or their emails, whatever they prefer, JP, which is our AI assistant, to kind of plug into. So that's basically how the interactions happen. And then we're configuring the AI agents on our side.
Awesome. Sounds good,
Yeah.
Marcos. Mike, did I answer it? Yep. He said thanks. Awesome. We can keep
Cool.
going.
And yeah, so this is, one of Jake's comments that I was speaking to is that, this particular workflow of moving data from Google Sheets to NetSuite every time they would receive or fulfill a purchase order kept falling onto his lap. And he's actually the one that was describing JP or AI agents in general as like having a quarter time assistant. Because for him, it wasn't worth hiring someone just to babysit NetSuite. Um, for various reasons, but there's a whole hiring process. It's extra management for him, and so he just wanted to completely get this automated. And with him again, it took less than a week to go live with this workflow. So we're seeing that AI agents are a very quick way to get to get to ROI and to see the impact. Um, and then some other common use cases that we see here are basically getting data that comes in via email, so Gmail or Outlook, and then populating that information into the system of record. So here I write, email purchase orders, but we also see, for example, distributor reports, shipment tracker updates, things like that. And just so you understand, we've seen customers where when they get started, they just want to they test it by just emailing or forwarding emails to the AI agent. And then now, with several customers, the AI is actually just CC'd in all the emails. And so they're asking their suppliers and their distributors to just CC the particular AI agent on all email communication, and then that goes straight into JP, and then it gets ingested and entered into their system. So this is one of those examples of where, at the beginning, it's a simple thing, just forwarding the emails, and then the layers of complexity can get added onto that. Um, and then, one I mentioned before is detecting when minimum order quantities in purchase orders aren't met. And so those orders can come in via email, via SPS Commerce, via any other platform. And then, we can detect and flag any potential issues that you want us to be checking. And then that goes straight to your email. And so you know whether to be following up with a customer or not. And that's something that can also be automated. Like those emails going to your customer saying, hey, this PO doesn't match the minimum order quantity. Or if you need customers to buy in multiples of 10, 52, whatever it is, that message of letting them know that it's not being met can also be automated too. And then also, writing directly into your system, whether it's NetSuite, Sin 7, or whatever you're using. Yeah. Which, for example, we work with a brand called Aveline, so Cameron Diaz's wine brand. And for them, we're helping automate their shipment updates that come in via email and then putting that um, into their system of record. Yeah. And so, the ROI of AI agents primarily is time savings. So when we're talking to brands who are, justifying whether to use AI or not, the way that they're kind of convincing the finance team to go for it is basically comparing, how much does it cost us to pay someone to do that, and then how much does it cost to use an AI agent for that process. So that's a pretty black and white way to compare the savings on that. But one thing that we see with brands after they've implemented AI agents is that there's actually a bunch of sort of, let's call it secondary benefits. And so the main one is error reduction. So, right, whenever you have humans moving data from one place to another, there's bound to be, some fat fingers, some human error there. And so using AI agents, they do see it, basically that goes away. Um, now, if they did not, so a lot of that is because we have a human in the loop. But even if we did not have that, the amount of errors that even get flagged by us is much lower than what they were experiencing beforehand. It's also infinitely scalable. So let's say that you go from having, a certain number of purchase orders coming in a week, let's say 10, to having 10,000. That same workflow automation can scale you the whole way. So as soon as you kind of lock a process in place, it can scale with you very easily. And as I mentioned, the speed to ROI using an AI agent is much quicker than hiring someone full-time or finding a virtual assistant. Um, and unlike using someone on the team, like these AIs, obviously, it's kind of a cliche, but they never get sick. They don't miss a day of work. They're there constantly 24/7. And so you are able to reliably delegate away processes. And they have a much higher level of data security than, using someone remotely. Um, and for us in particular, we're extremely focused on maintaining data security. Um, and regardless of who you're using to implement AI agents, I would definitely you'd want to validate that your data is secure. And also not being used to train the agents themselves, other than for your particular workflow. And so yeah, I'm going to go into our process for implementing AI agents, or what we've seen kind of work the best among the many brands that we're working with. And so, as I've mentioned multiple times, really the best way to get started is to just pick one simple workflow. Or let's say that you have, a particular workflow in mind, to try to like simplify it down to one thing, or one part of it. Get started there. You have to really define what is the SOP, or what's the, defining all the rules of this particular workflow. What's the input data? What's being, output, and then any kinds of, steps in between. Because that's, on our side, what we're using to then configure the AI agents. And so the more detailed it is, the easier or the less back and forth there will be after, we go live. So again, different people will set up agents in different ways. The way that we do it is that we actually, just have you kind of share your screen, show us how it works, and then we will go and create the standard operating procedure document, and then kind of work with you to make sure that it's fully accurate, and then we'll configure JP, go live. First 2 weeks will be some back and forth, and then from there, we've never, I mean, we've even typically after the first week, there's no issues. Um, and so from there it goes live, and then you'll see that automation running very smoothly. And you'll never have to worry about that particular workflow again, and you can expand on it. Um, yeah, because I see a lot of brands, they don't know how to use AI, where to implement it. And so, starting with a simple process is really the best thing to do. Because you can see black and white, does it work? Is it better than me doing it? Or, whoever on the team was previously doing it? And then you can add more layers of complexity. Okay, so key takeaways. I think the first thing that that I would really say is that, AI automation is here. I was actually just at an expo in Canada over the weekend, where there was a lot of discussions about AI and, is it coming? How is it being used? and what's the future of CPG operations going to look like. And so really, yeah, as I've said, AI is here. Brands are already using it. They're already gaining a competitive advantage over people that are not using it. But eventually, I do think it's pretty clear that this will become industry standard. Every brand will be using AI to automate pretty much all the grunt work that gets done. And I think that the future of CPG will be one where, as I said, all of the grunt work that you or someone in the team is currently doing, moving data across systems, is going to be entirely delegated away so that you can focus fully on sales, on growth, on optimizing your supply chain, getting better pricing, all of these things. And you won't have to worry anymore about updating NetSuite, updating Google Sheets, any of the manual data entry that you're currently doing or that your team is doing. So it's pretty clear to us that that's the direction we're heading. And there are many brands that are already today in a place where most of that grunt work is delegated away. Um, so that takes me to the conclusion of of the webinar. Um, and so happy to go into any questions. Feel free to put them in the chat or call them out. But as I've said, I'd recommend everyone here to really be thinking about how can they use AI to, improve their efficiency and to, stop having their team or themselves waste any time on entering data, updating systems. Because we see, as I've said, many brands are already past that point, and so they're extremely efficient. So if you're trying to compete with in a place where people are not doing that stuff anymore, anytime that you waste updating a spreadsheet or updating a NetSuite system, is a waste of time completely. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Marcos, for going into that. I think it's super helpful to see examples of other brands and like how they're implementing it to actually save time and money and increase accuracy, which I think is really cool. So I want to open up to everyone who's listening as well. If you have any questions or want to talk through like ideas for workflows and want to understand if it's possible, feel free to come on up. You can either use the raise hand feature or just write like you have a question in the chat or just say hello and come off mute. Happy to answer any and all questions. And then while things are starting up, as you're thinking about questions, Marcos, question I had is, have you seen any degradation in the performance of the AI over time? Like as it's doing these tests over and over again, is it continuing to maintain that accuracy? Is it even like improving, or are you seeing any issues?
So I'll say a lot of the workflows that we're able to automate today were things that were extremely difficult, if not impossible, at the beginning of the year. So as we've seen, OpenAI and other LLM developers kind of come out with their latest models, the accuracy has been going up substantially, and we're able to do more things that were previously impossible. So it's quite the opposite. As these things are scaling, that the accuracy is getting better because at that point they've seen every kind of edge case of, the kind of mistakes that will be put into a purchase order or the kind of mistakes that will put into a distributor report, etc. So these things actually get more accurate over time. But already they're in a place where we see very little errors in the models that we work with.
Okay, that's awesome. Mike asks, who are your major competitors and why should the brand go with Kaizentree / JP instead of another group?
Yeah, so in the case of First Leaf, before they went ahead with us, they were looking at developing something in-house. They were looking at also using a tool like N8N, which is also sort of like a beefed up Zapier. But ultimately, they did not want to be, it was a lot more expensive for them to be building it in-house, and they also didn't want to have the responsibility of maintaining the workflow automations. And so the reason why we see brands want to use JP or use us is because we don't like we're essentially like a one-stop shop for configuring the AI agents. And there's no heavy lifting on your end whatsoever. So we find that we're a lot easier to work with than something like N8N where you're configuring it yourself, maintaining it yourself. And that's the main reason that we see brands use us.
And Marcus, I actually want to highlight too. Do you want to give like a quick plug on like what Kaizentree is? Because you and the team have extensive experience helping brands run their operations
Yeah.
already. And I think that's really big. as
Yeah.
different from being a lot of companies who are just like new to the space and don't actually understand how CPG operations work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's yeah, we see that as a big difference too. So, we actually started back in 2019 as consultants. We were working with actually initially in Shanghai. So we were working with a lot of manufacturers in China, helping them streamline their operations. And so we did a lot of ERP setups, implementations, a lot of inventory software implementations. And so we're, acutely aware of the different ways in which manufacturers and brands operate. And so back in 2023, we dropped the consulting, shifted into building our own kind of ERP system, which we call Kaizentree OS. Um, and so that's where what we were doing at the beginning, and we still have that today. That's best in class for traceability. So on that side, we're mostly working with organic certified brands. Um, and then JP is something that we launched actually closer to the beginning of this year. Because what we saw is that there's so many brands out there that are already on a NetSuite or already on Sin 7, Google Sheets, whatever, and they don't want it. They're not in a position to be changing their system, but they have so many issues when it comes to using the systems themselves, mostly around updating them, moving data into those systems, and so JP is the way that we can actually help those brands get rid of all that manual data entry. But through being a consultant, running our Kaizen OS platform, we have extremely deep experience working with all kinds of brands. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Liz had a question. Would you
Yeah.
recommend vibe coding to work through needs and come up with a V1 before coming to you?
Um, so again, it really depends on what you want to be spending your time on. If you want to be spending your time on developing software, developing workflow automations, then that is something that you could start with. If you want to be focusing on building your brand, on growth, on sales, whatever it is, then I would recommend using, someone like us where we'll actually configure the AI agents for you. Um, so, typically when brands come to us, it's when they haven't set up anything yet. There's some that have already tried N8N, already tried vibe coding it and failed. Um, but we see a mix of that. Um, and then, Mike, another reason why brands will use this is because we have all the experience, obviously, to be building this ourselves. So it's much easier for us to launch these workflow automations than it is for the brands to be doing them directly.
It's always interesting because like like a lot of founders, love doing things myself and like exploring in here. But it reminded me of when I was launching or running my CPG brand and we ran everything on Google Sheets. We had like inventory, sales tracking, e-com orders, like the entire business operating system. And it was all built around one product line with three different flavors. And I remember
Mhm.
once we launched our new product, the entire database like broke because it
Mhm.
was not set up for that. And I
Yeah,
realized at that point that like I'm building a CPG brand,
yeah,
but I'm also moonlighting as like a software develop like a developer in Excel and realize like, okay, instead of spending my time doing this, which I enjoy to a degree, like let me work with someone who already has the systems and works with lots of different companies to understand those edge cases to do it so I can save time. And I can see that being a huge benefit of working with you because you work with so many brands, you've implemented these things, you're not doing it for the
mhm.
first time, you're actually have that experience so that you're getting to the right answer faster.
And we also see a bunch of these, no code AI agent platforms. Um, but these are industry agnostic tools. And so the difference with using someone like us who are purely focused on CPG operations is that, we go into a lot more depth on our NetSuite integration, on our, Google Sheets integration, on our Sin 7 integration, than any of these agnostic tools do. And we understand how your operations actually work because we've worked with a whole bunch of other brands that, so we've seen many ways that, that these things get set up. So there's a lot more nuance and depth when it comes to automating your operations that these industry agnostic tools just don't go into. Or, a lot of these tools are actually, they say they're agnostic, but they're focused on serving, insurances and banks and software developers. And we're
Awesome.
only focused on CPG operations.
Are there any other like what other use cases are you using the are you like automating within this for brands? I'm kind of curious on like what other things people are thinking of. They're like, oh, this could be automated.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, let me just go over here. So even when it comes to processing purchase orders, there's so many components there. The first thing is getting the data from the email or the platform that it's coming from and then putting it into your system of record. The second layer of complexity is okay, like we got to be checking that the minimum order quantities are being met. And then beyond that, it's like, okay, well, we need to be emailing the customers whenever the minimum order quantity is not met. And then like, oh, we can also be emailing the customers whenever we're shipping the order, or there's different, like, basically over time it kind of takes over all of your repetitive email updates, all of your repetitive kind of tasks that you're doing. Because pulling on the thread of processing purchase orders, there's so much that you do that's repetitive that's tied to that. We also see brands thinking about using AI agents to tell them like what inventory transfers to be doing across their warehouses. To be telling them, emailing them once a week or once a month with like, hey, this is what you need to be reordering. Um, we also see brands that whenever they go through a production run, there's so many steps, right? You gotta order the raw materials. You have to schedule the deliveries. You have to confirm that the raw materials are going to be delivered to your co-packer. You then have to confirm with your co-packer that they've received it, that they're manufacturing on that day. Then you have to coordinate the your 3PL or whoever to come pick up the product and deliver it to the warehouse. So there's so many steps in the production process that are all repetitive, all rules based, and can all be automated. And so, we see brands that are starting with a simple thing, uh, you know, having, automating the emails going out to suppliers to purchase the raw materials, but their end goal is to automate their entire co-manufacturing process so that they can just tell the AI, okay, cool, I want to have, or, I like, let's go ahead with your suggestion to make, 1,000 units this month, and then it'll go and trigger all the set of actions that will get this production run scheduled. Um, which is something that we see brands take a lot of time to do. Um, but so yeah, we see a lot of these things that make up your current day-to-day and that are repetitive can and will eventually be automated. And then you'll be focused on way more strategic things that will actually drive the business and that you want to do, but you just can't get around to do. Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's helpful. Any other questions? I'm curious to those listening, do you have any use cases that you're thinking of that you would like to run by Marcos to see if it's possible to do? Even if you're just kind of like fleshing out the ideas. Or maybe Liz, I know you're mentioning like kind of working through needs first. Do you have any use cases that you were thinking of that you're trying to figure out if AI can actually do it?
Uh, Not really. Sorry.
Oh, good.
Uh, I, yeah, I'm using AI self-built agents, but at a small scale for something that's going to stay small scale.
What kind of things are you using it for? I'm curious.
Actually, just for research and translating research into plain language, and coming up with networking questions for potential clients.
Awesome. Love
Yeah,
those
very
use
cool.
cases.
A lot of those things you can configure as a GPT on ChatGPT. So there's a lot of stuff outside of these workflow automations that I'm doing myself. A lot of LinkedIn posts can be, you can train a GPT on ChatGPT to like, give you excellent kind of content ideas, things like this, or, research questions or questions that will help you close deals or whatever it is. So you can go very far with GPTs, but they just don't plug into your systems.
Yeah, I get it to give me outputs in specific types, so I can also plug it into pitch decks.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, perfect. I mean, and there's a bunch of, in the case of pitch decks, there's a bunch that you can just prompt it and it'll create the presentation for you. In this case, I did it myself, but I was looking at a bunch of tools for this presentation where I could just tell it what I wanted to cover and it would have done the whole thing. It's just in that particular case, I didn't think the quality was there, more on the design side. But yeah, totally.
Awesome. I love that. I guess one thing too, Robert's just kind of mentioning understanding that, he's working to understand what their co-packer will be handling versus their own operating system. Have you worked with brands who have like co-packers and
Mhm.
what they're trying, like how this integrates them with like their data system for yours, even like, for my other business, Joyful Co., we have a co-packer who uses Extensive, right, to
Mhm.
manage their operations.
Yep.
So have you had any examples of like tying into their systems or things like that?
Yep. Yeah. So we have had direct experience with Extensive. So we can write into that system. We can pull data from that system. Um, yeah. Yeah, for Extensive, we've done that. And like actually most of the brands, that's not true. It's split 50-50 between brands that are using co-manufacturers and brands that manufacture themselves. Um, Even the ones that are using co-manufacturers, some of them have kind of a keychain agreement, so they get finished product, they don't procure any raw materials or packaging, and then others that are doing the procurement, and so the workflows that get automated there are quite different. Yeah, definitely it's easier when you just have a keychain agreement. There's a lot, you're just dealing with finished products. It's a lot easier.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, it's interesting, Marcos, 'cause I realized one headache that a lot of people are running into is they're trying to figure like, I don't even know what AI can do and like what I can trust it to do to even know if I should be automating it.
Yeah,
Have you ever had people that just come to you and like walk through like, hey, here are the different systems that we're using or different processes to understand like where automation can come in and play a role and like
yeah,
you walk through that?
yeah, yeah. So, the way that we're typically working with these brands is that before we get started with that simplified version of the first workflow, they want to know that they typically have a whole bunch of workflows in mind that they want to be automating, and so they do want us to be scoping out and confirming whether those are things that can be done or not before they even get started. So we see this in every case. They're like, okay, so I want to do, I want to automate purchase order processing, I want to automate distributor reports processing, and I want to automate getting that data from Google Sheets into NetSuite. And I also want to have these other email sequences, like flagging minimum order quantities. So we typically see that the brands will come to us with a whole bunch of things. They want to have it. They're asking us like, is that even possible? And so we cover all of that in the beginning. Yeah. And so like I think where a lot of this is like, a lot of people don't know what AI can do, where it can fit in, and so we're used as a resource to also answer those questions. But we can also obviously implement them for you too.
Awesome. Love that. So if you're listening to this and have ideas and like, oh, I wonder like where can it help me? Definitely reach out to Marcos and he's happy to help and brainstorm like how it can impact your business, how much time and money it can save you. Marcos, thanks so much for being on today and joining for the webinar. Thanks so much everyone for
Yeah.
joining. As a reminder, we'll be sending out the recording of the webinar as well. So if there's anything that you missed or want to go back and watch anything, you'll be able to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just wanted to say, Mike, if I'm happy to go into more depth about the workflows that you were mentioning. And then yeah, I can share my contacts after, or Jordan will share it. Um, yeah, so happy to go into more depth.
Perfect. Sounds good, everyone. Have a great rest of the week.